The Eastburn family once seemed like the picture of a happy military household. Gary, Catherine, and their 3 young daughters were eagerly preparing for a fresh start. They were set to move to England, believing it would be the beginning of a bright new chapter in their lives. But what was meant to be a hopeful new beginning quickly spiraled into an unimaginable nightmare. All because one man made a decision that would tear their family apart through unspeakable violence. Today, we revisit the horrific tragedy that unfolded just days before Mother's Day in 1985, a crime that still echoes through time. Catherine Eastburn grew up in Kansas City, Missouri, a place where she became accustomed to the ups and downs of life. Her childhood was peaceful, but nothing could have prepared her for the profound turn her future would take. In the 1970s, at what seemed like an ordinary softball game, Katie met Gary Eastburn, a charming young man who quickly caught her eye and stole her heart. Their connection was instant, and their love story ignited like a spark. It was love at first sight. By 1975, they were married, shortly after Gary joined the United States Air Force, a decision that would shape the entire course of their lives. Their family began to grow. In 1979, they welcomed their first daughter, Kara. Erin followed in 1981. And in 1983, baby Jana completed their family of 5. Gary had by then risen to the rank of captain in the Air Force, and his military career was taking off. He was stationed at Pope Air Force Base in Fayetteville, North Carolina, where the Eastburns settled into what seemed to be a safe, happy life. In 1985, Gary Eastburn received orders for a transfer to England, a major step forward in his Air Force career. But to make it happen, the family had to split up temporarily. While Gary attended a 10-week officer training program at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, Katie stayed behind in Fayetteville to handle everything: the paperwork, the packing, and most importantly, caring for their 3 young daughters. Among all the things on her to-do list, one weighed heavily on Katie's heart. Their beloved dog, Dixie, wouldn't be allowed to make the move overseas. To Katie, Dixie wasn't just a pet. She was part of the family. But there was no other choice. Katie reluctantly placed an ad, hoping to find Dixie a new loving home. What she didn't know was that this seemingly innocent decision would open the door to a stranger, a man who would soon become the center of the most horrifying nightmare the Eastburn family would ever face. A simple act, giving away the family dog, turned out to be the beginning of an unthinkable tragedy. While Katie juggled everything on her own, Gary's absence wasn't unusual for the family. His military career had always taken top priority, and they had long grown used to the rhythm of military life. It was Gary's promotion to captain that had brought them to Fayetteville, and now his new assignment in England was seen as the next big step forward. Katie had always supported her husband and never once complained, but none of them could have foreseen that their lives were about to take a turn from which there would be no return. The man Katie met was Timothy Hennis, a sergeant in the U.S. Army, living in Fayetteville with his wife, Angela, and their young daughter, Christina. Hennis lived a quiet, almost unremarkable life. He was a young soldier trying to build a future, balancing duty and family. On May 7, 1985, Timothy Hennis responded to Catherine Eastburn's classified ad to adopt the family's dog, Dixie. He came to the Eastburn home, where Katie welcomed him inside and introduced him to Dixie, the gentle dog the family couldn't take with them to England. Hennis and his wife, Angela, were animal lovers. They were looking for a dog that could adjust well to life with their young daughter, Christina. Their current dog had become jealous and wasn't adapting well to the newborn. Hennis hoped Dixie might be a fresh start, a better fit for their growing family. Before leaving, Hennis politely asked to use the restroom. Katie agreed without hesitation. Everything about the visit was normal. Nothing seemed strange or alarming. Hennis then left with Dixie and no one could have known that this seemingly harmless encounter was the beginning of an unimaginable tragedy. Katie had no idea that she had just lived one of the last peaceful days of her life. There were no warning signs, no gut feeling. To her, Timothy Hennis was simply a polite young soldier adopting a dog. As Hennis drove away with Dixie, the Eastburn household returned to their daily routine. Gary was still away in Alabama for officer training, and Katie was busy preparing for the family's big move. But fate had already shifted, and the chain of events that would lead to horror had quietly begun. The night of May 9, 1985, began like any other in the Eastburn household. Katie spent the day caring for her 3 young daughters, Cara, Erin, and baby Jana. But as darkness fell, an unthinkable nightmare descended upon the home. By the early morning hours of May 10th, the bodies of Katie, Cara, and Erin were discovered. All had been brutally murdered. Katie had been attacked and stabbed multiple times, while her 2 little girls were savagely killed. Blood covered the crime scene, but strangely, the house showed little sign of disturbance. The front door was still locked. The only clue that something was wrong was a growing pile of newspapers, left untouched on the front porch. No one had come out to get them in days. That night, May 10th, Gary Eastburn, still away for officer training, grew anxious when Katie didn't call him as she usually did. He contacted the Fayetteville Police Department. Officers checked the house the following day, but saw no obvious signs of foul play. They left a note on the front door, hoping for a simple explanation for the eerie silence. But the truth was more horrifying than anyone could have imagined. On Sunday, May 12th, Sergeant Bob Seafault, a neighbor of the Eastburns, returned home after helping a drunken soldier the night before. His wife, visibly concerned, pointed out that the newspapers were still untouched. The family's car hadn't moved from the driveway, and the baby stroller was still sitting outside the back door. Something was clearly wrong. Bob walked over to the house and heard the faint, desperate cry of a child coming from inside. He knocked and rang the doorbell, but no one answered. Trusting his instincts, he called Julie Chernick, the Eastburns' regular babysitter. Julie arrived shortly after. Peering through a window, she was stunned to see little Jana, just 22 months old, crying alone in her crib, covered in filth and severely dehydrated after being left unattended for 3 days. Though her instinct was to break in immediately, Bob urged her to wait for the police. William Totman was the first officer to arrive at the scene. He broke a window to get inside the house, quickly reached the crib, and carried baby Jana out. She was dehydrated, exhausted, but still alive. He grabbed a stack of diapers and handed the child to neighbor Bob Seafault before heading back in to investigate the house. What he discovered inside would soon reveal a chilling truth. Totman found the lifeless bodies of Katie Eastburn and her 3-year-old daughter Erin, both unresponsive, without any signs of life. A more thorough search of the house soon uncovered a 3rd body, 5-year-old Cara, found motionless on her bed, also deceased. Katie and her 2 oldest daughters had been brutally murdered. Each of their throats had been deeply slashed, a cold and calculated act of violence. Only baby Jana had survived, trapped in her crib for 3 days, severely dehydrated and covered in waste. The Eastburn family massacre quickly became the most shocking story in the city of Fayetteville, not only because of the unimaginable brutality, but also due to the eerie silence that had hung over the home for days before the truth was uncovered. The biggest question at that moment, the one haunting everyone on scene, was simply, why? Why would anyone murder a young mother and her 2 innocent children? They were a quiet military family with no signs of trouble. What kind of motive could possibly justify such a monstrous crime? That very night, the investigation kicked off in full force. 2 veteran detectives, Robert Bidd and Jack Watts from the Cumberland County, Sheriff's office were assigned to gather evidence and track down the killer. They conducted a full search of the Eastburn home. Among the evidence collected were unidentified fingerprints, several strands of hair, and thanks to luminol testing, faint traces of blood indicating a sloppy attempt to clean the crime scene. Someone had tried to scrub the walls and bathroom, but did a poor job, and the violence could not be hidden. As Gary assisted investigators, he noted that several items were missing from the home, including Katie's ATM card, $300 in cash, and a piece of paper with her PIN number written on it. That detail became a crucial lead in opening a new line of investigation. The first major breakthrough came from the testimony of a man named Patrick Cohn, a local gate guard. He had witnessed in the early morning hours of May 10th, the exact time frame when the murders likely occurred. It was around 3:30 in the morning when Patrick Cohn, walking home from his girlfriend's place, spotted something strange. A tall white man was leaving the Eastburns driveway, dressed in jeans, a black members-only jacket, and a dark knit cap pulled low. As he passed Patrick, he muttered something eerie. Getting an early start today. Then he got into a white Chevrolet Chevette and drove away. Patrick didn't know it then, but what he saw would become a crucial lead in one of North Carolina's most haunting murder cases. He described the man as about 6 feet 4 inches tall, with blonde hair poking out from under his cap. A distinctive look. Thanks to Patrick's testimony, investigators were able to narrow down the time of the murders, sometime between 8 p.m. on May 9th and 3:00 a.m. on May 10th. Along with the announcement, authorities released a composite sketch based on Patrick Cohn's description, the first public image of the primary suspect in the Eastburn family murders. Even with a few promising leads, the investigation stalled. Everything seemed like a maze with no way out, until a seemingly minor detail uncovered a major truth. Timothy Hennis, the man who had visited Katie, Eastburn's home to adopt her dog, was the last known person to have contact with the family, just days before the tragedy. He quickly became the prime suspect. On May 15th, 1985, with media attention mounting, Timothy Hennis voluntarily walked into the Fayetteville Police Department to speak with detectives Robert Bidd and Jack Watts. Calm and composed, he recounted his version of events. He said he visited the Eastburn home on May 7th. They chatted for a bit. Then, according to Hennis, he made one follow-up call to Katie on May 9th to check on how Dixie was adjusting. And that was it. Hennis claimed that after the phone call, he took his wife and daughter to visit his in-laws, then stopped at a gas station on the way home. Everything sounded routine, normal, even. But the police weren't just taking his word for it. They collected samples of his blood, saliva, hair, fingerprints. Then came a pivotal moment. Patrick Cohn, the man who had reported seeing a tall man walking away from the Eastburn driveway early on the morning of May 10th, was brought in to review a photo lineup. Without hesitation, Patrick pointed directly to the picture of Timothy Hennis. And that wasn't all. Investigators discovered that Katie's ATM card had been used on the night of May 10th and again early on May 11th. $300, the exact amount reported missing from her wallet. A female witness recalled seeing a blonde man, matching Hennis's description, standing near the ATM just after the final transaction. And as if the suspicions weren't strong enough, Hennis's landlord confirmed that he had just paid his rent late in the amount of $300, just hours after Katie's card was illegally used. That only fueled speculation that Hennis may have had a financial motive for the crime. Timothy Hennis was now the prime suspect in the Eastburn family murders. Investigators began closely tracking his every move, but there was still one major obstacle. No direct physical evidence tied Hennis to the scene. Everything was circumstantial, not yet enough to hold up in court. And no one could have imagined that this case would stretch on for more than a quarter of a century becoming one of the most complex and controversial cases in Fayetteville's history. Pieces of Hennis's story began to show cracks. First was the alibi he gave, that he had taken his wife and daughter to his in-laws' house that night. But then Nancy Mazer, Hennis's ex-girlfriend, came forward and claimed that he had unexpectedly shown up at her place that same night, during the exact time the murders were believed to have occurred. Next was the black members-only military jacket that Hennis dropped off for dry cleaning on the morning of May 10th, just hours after the killings. Around the same time, some neighbors recalled seeing him burning items in his backyard. That evening, police showed up at Hennis's door with an arrest warrant. He immediately called Beaver, Holt, Richardson, Stern, Berg, and Glazier, one of Fayetteville's most prestigious law firms. Two of North Carolina's top criminal defense attorneys, Jerry Beaver and Billy Richardson, were assigned to represent him. They wasted no time. The pair hired private investigator Bob Nyer to launch an independent inquiry, combing through police files, evaluating the prosecution's evidence, and searching for anything the original investigators might have missed. Meanwhile, the prosecution was closing in on the final steps, preparing to formally charge Hennis with 3 counts of murder and aggravated assault. But one major obstacle remained. The case was still built entirely on circumstantial evidence. There was no murder weapon, and no eyewitnesses saw the crime take place. And in court, suspicion alone isn't enough. They needed more if they wanted a conviction. The trial of Timothy Hennis began in 1986, and from the outset, it was clear this wouldn't be a straightforward case. The prosecution relied on a series of circumstantial evidence presenting a grim narrative that Hennis had murdered Katie Eastburn and her 2 daughters to cover up a sexual assault against Katie. They laid out a tight timeline. A key witness, Patrick Cohn, testified that he saw a tall blonde man leaving the Eastburn driveway around 3:30 a.m. carrying a trash bag. According to the prosecution, that man was Hennis. But Hennis's defense team, led by Jerry Beaver and Billy Richardson, quickly went on the offensive. They dissected the witness testimony, pointing out inconsistencies and questioning the reliability of identifying Hennis in the dark, foggy early morning hours. They even reenacted the scene to test Cohn's claim. A man matching Hennis's description was positioned at the Eastburn home at the same time Patrick claimed to have seen someone. The result? It was nearly impossible to make out any clear features at that distance in the thick pre-dawn fog. Private investigator Bob Nyer discovered that the fingerprints, hair samples, and even shoe prints at the scene didn't match Hennis. In fact, the shoes found were too small for his size. Then came a shocking revelation: a condom left underneath the wardrobe, a detail the police had completely overlooked. This raised the possibility that the semen recovered from Katie's body might have belonged to her husband, Gary, not Hennis. Nayar continued interviewing other witnesses. A paper delivery woman, Charlotte Kirby, confirmed that it had rained early that morning and visibility was poor. Neighbors said they hadn't seen anything suspicious the morning of the murders. However, just a few nights later, they claimed they saw Patrick Cohn walking down the street wearing a dark beanie, a military-style member's jacket, and carrying a trash bag. An oddly familiar image, eerily matching the very description Cohn had originally given of the supposed suspect. But despite the defense team's efforts, law enforcement remained convinced that Timothy Hennis was the man responsible for the horrifying Eastburn murders. In their eyes, the circumstantial evidence, the witness testimony, and even their own professional instincts all pointed in one direction. Hennis was guilty. During the trial, prosecutors didn't hesitate to show crime scene photos, haunting and heartbreaking images to highlight the brutality of the massacre. And while there was no direct physical evidence, such as DNA or a murder weapon, the prosecution insisted. Everything still pointed back to Hennis. And then, after a lengthy trial, On July 4th, 1986, the jury delivered its verdict. Timothy Hennis was found guilty of first-degree rape and 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death in the Cumberland County Superior Court. But the story didn't end there. Not long after Hennis was transferred to Central Prison in Raleigh, something strange happened. He received a postcard from someone calling themselves Mr. X, claiming to be the real killer. The mysterious letter left everyone puzzled. Was it a genuine confession, or just a desperate stunt to derail the investigation? Hennis's attorneys dismissed it as a prank, but they still carefully filed the postcard away as evidence. Interestingly, the prosecution also received a similar letter, but chose to ignore it. In their eyes, the evidence against Hennis remained overwhelming and undeniable. Still, the defense team didn't give up. They worked quietly but relentlessly, filing appeals, examining procedural missteps, and scrutinizing the case for any overlooked flaws. Eventually, their persistence paid off. After more than 2 years behind bars, Hennis's original conviction was overturned. A higher court ordered a full retrial of the case, and the new trial was scheduled to begin on February 27, 1989. During the retrial, the prosecution entered the courtroom with what they believed was a powerful new witness, a neighbor named Eliza Peabody. Previously, Eliza had told investigators that she hadn't seen anything the night of the murders. But now, she suddenly changed her story, claiming she had, in fact, seen Timothy Hennis leaving the crime scene. One by one, the prosecution's witnesses were subjected to intense cross-examination. First up was Lucille Cook, an ATM attendant. Initially, she had told authorities she couldn't clearly identify who had withdrawn money at the time. But on the stand, she now insisted it was Hennis. The defense immediately pushed back, presenting detailed bank transaction records and breaking down the timeline down to the minute, exposing major inconsistencies in Lucille's testimony. Then came Patrick Cohn, the prosecution's so-called star witness. Under pressure, Patrick made a shocking admission. He had once been charged with stealing an ATM card, and that case had mysteriously disappeared without a trace. But it didn't stop there. Sean Buckner, a friend of Patrick's, took the stand and testified that Patrick had once written a letter admitting he wasn't even sure he saw anyone at all. And then the defense played their trump card. John R. Paik, a man who had been living near the Eastburn home at the time of the murders. When he took the stand, the entire courtroom was stunned. He looked almost exactly like Timothy Hennis. John described himself as 6 feet 4 inches tall, wearing a black members-only style jacket and dark pants matching perfectly with the initial description even by Patrick Cohn. With each piece of the prosecution's case being dismantled, the argument against Hennis began to crumble. And finally, after weeks of tense courtroom proceedings, Timothy Hennis was found not guilty. Many believed the case had closed in 1989 and that the justice system had failed the Eastburn family. But then, more than 2 decades later, a major breakthrough emerged. In 2007, modern DNA testing produced undeniable evidence. The semen sample found in Katie Eastburn's body was a perfect match to Timothy Hennis. Under normal circumstances, this would be grounds for a retrial. But the civilian justice system was blocked by double jeopardy, the principle that prevents someone from being tried twice for the same crime. The case seemed to be at a dead end. That is, until the U.S. military stepped in. Although Hennis had retired, the military recalled him to active duty as a sergeant, making it possible to try him under court-martial jurisdiction. At his third trial, Timothy Hennis made a stunning confession. He admitted to having sexual intercourse with Katie, but claimed it was consensual, and that it occurred on the very night of the murders. Hennis said he kept that detail hidden to protect the feelings of the victim's husband. But the military jury didn't believe him. On April 9, 2010, Timothy Hennis was convicted of 3 counts of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to death and placed on military death row at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. All of Hennis's appeals were denied. In 2021, the United States Supreme Court rejected his final appeal, leaving the conviction and the death sentence intact. Timothy Hennis, a man who once wore the uniform with pride, once walked free from the courtroom, declared innocent. But 3 lives, a mother and her 2 innocent daughters, were brutally taken, throats slashed. A toddler left alone in her crib for 3 days. Now, undeniable DNA evidence has brought him back to face the death penalty. The question is, has justice finally been served? Or is it just beginning? Do you believe this is the price he deserves for the crimes he committed? Or do you think there's still something we don't know? The choice is yours. Leave a comment. Speak the truth as you see it. And if you want to keep uncovering cases like this, where evil hides behind a friendly face, where justice isn't always black and white, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next.